We're on to round 2 of my 5 Nights at Freddy's Grand Prix, where I'm doing 3 different FNAF-based topics 3 Mondays in a row. And for today's episode, I thought I'd go with another second round of something that I've actually done before with FNAF characters. Kind of. See, I've done a full episode of turning FNAF animatronics into Marvel supervillains, and in today's episode there's going to be some of that, but I'm also making the characters into heroes, and instead of putting all of them into Marvel, I'm going to put some into DC as well. Give me more FNAF-based suggestions in the comments, subscribe if you're new here and you want more of this, but beyond that, let's get into it, shall we? Let's go!
Hit like if you want, subscribe if you feel like, but either way, enjoy the show.
Gotham City graveyards have no shortage of bodies put in the ground with contorted, grim, forced smiles splashed across their faces. The Joker is completely apathetic towards human life and will take it whenever and however he needs to send his twisted message of the week to the Batman or to the people of Gotham. Though most will never know the true depths of his cruelest killing, one he committed to the same person over and over and over again. In the early days of his criminal career, before it was fully known just how sadistic of a criminal he was, one particularly bold comedian took to the stages of Gotham to make fun of the Joker. His name was Henry Emily. At that point, the Joker had been put away in Arkham for the first time by Batman, and the asylum wasn't yet famous for its constant prison breaks. Emily wanted to help people get past the fear of the clown, and thought that laughter was the best way to do that. But as you might expect, the Joker took this personally. Some who claim to know who the Joker was before he became the Joker say that Emily and Joker used to do comedy circuits in the city together, though Henry has denied these claims. But it could explain how the Joker knew so quickly that the best way to get back at Henry was through his daughter, Charlotte. Charlotte Emily was a first-year student at Gotham University, but would often go to dinner with her father before one of his shows, then watch the act. One night, halfway through one of his shows, before the public knew that there had just been a breakout at Arkham, Charlotte got an email from one of her professors about an urgent matter with her latest paper. Though, oddly, the message ended with a smiley clown emoji. She slipped out of the show into the alley outside to call him, but a foul stench suddenly filled her nose, green gas swirled over her eyes, and as her senses faded to black, she could just hear a fading, sinister laugh. The Joker could have killed her there and sent a clear message to all, but he'd also been looking to test something, and deemed that the daughter of the man publicly ridiculing him could be a perfect test subject. Soon after escaping Arkham and taking Charlotte hostage, he'd managed to acquire waters of a Lazarus pit. This substance was used by Ra's al Ghul of the League of Shadows to live eternally and even to revive the dead, though it was said to take a toll on those it revived. Joker knew at some point he may need to be resurrected himself, and wanted to see what kind of toll this was exactly. The Joker put on a big show, recording himself killing Charlotte Emily, telling her father that this was what you get when you belittle the clown prince of crime, and made sure it was shown across Gotham. But what people didn't see was him then using the waters to bring her back to life. When she returned, she was manic and out of her mind, not to mention stronger than she'd been before. A successful experiment in the Joker's eyes. He then tried mixing Lazarus waters with his own Joker toxin out of curiosity. He killed her again and poured it down her throat. Once again she came back, this time cackling like a maniac. Again and again he killed her and tried new ways of bringing her back with various versions of the Lazarus waters. Until finally the Bat found him and chased him out of his latest lair. When the Gotham police searched the place, they found plenty of Charlotte's blood, but never her body. Batman swore it had been there when he found the Joker, so it was as if it had just disappeared. A few weeks later, a new vigilante took to the Gotham underbelly, this one far more sadistic and lethal than the Bat. Those she hunted rarely caught a glimpse of her. They said she moved like a floating shadow, but had a mask like a creepy porcelain doll with glowing eyes behind it. Some even say she has supernatural abilities, the power to shift her hands into tentacles, almost like Martian Manhunter, which she uses to then tear the limbs off her victims. The criminal underground started calling her Nightmarrione, and became more afraid of her than they were of the Bat, though she would be specifically drawn to any crooks known to prey on young women or children. She was only hunting known criminals, but the ruthlessness with which she killed them set the bat on hunting her as well. But even for the world's greatest detective, this Nightmarrione was a true mystery. He had an inkling that she may be Charlotte Emily, but had no proof, or any idea what blend of Lazarus waters may have given her supernatural powers. Perhaps it wasn't even the chemicals, but abilities pulled from her many ventures beyond the veil of life. Regardless of what is true, the criminals of Gotham now have much more to fear than just a broken rib or arm at the fists of the Batman. The Sinister Six have long been a team of Spider-Man's most vengeful villains, often working in a coordinated effort to finally put an end to the Wallcrawler. Though occasionally they have had other goals in mind. You see, the last time the Sinister Six were put away by Spidey, Doc Ock's lab was dismantled by damage control. But not long after that, Octavius got word in prison that Stark Industries had just announced significant upgrades to their Iron Legion drones that were identical to technology Ock had been utilizing in animatronic experimentation. He was certain that Stark had paid off damage control to steal his experiments so he could utilize the work of what Octavius called a true genius. Over the next month, Ock planned out then instigated a prison break, taking his 5 superpowered compatriots out along with him, with the intent to get revenge on Tony Stark. But if they were going to keep Spider-Man off their tails in the meantime, they'd need a distraction. During their breakout, a boy, who was likely just barely old enough to be in prison, came up to Ock and the Six and started gushing about what a fan he was of their work. It was an unusually chipper and friendly demeanor for a criminal in the raft. He said he was going to someday prove that he was a great enough villain to join the ranks of the Sinister Six. And Octavius told him that today might just be his lucky day. This boy was Bobby Bolton. He didn't have any superpowers, but he was somewhat of an inventor himself. He had chemically engineered a gas that was far lighter than helium and safer than hydrogen. He'd put this into a bulletproof balloon, attached it to his back, slapped some propulsion tech into his boots, and had just about the goofiest looking flight suit that anyone had ever seen. But it did the job. He used it to rob tourism airships that had a stop in New York. Spidey had been flagged to him pretty quick, and the Daily Bugle had a field day making fun of how many times this ridiculous, annoying little balloon boy, as they called him, outmaneuvered and escaped the Wallcrawler. He bested Spidey on 5 different occasions before getting webbed up and arrested. And he'd done all of that without any upgraded tech from Doc Ock. By that point, Octavius had given superpowers and advanced tech to many villains, and now it was Bobby's turn. All they needed him to do was keep Spider-Man distracted from hunting them down while they made their play at Stark. Bobby gave Ock one of his old backup suits for the Doctor to alter so that the changes weren't too visually dramatic, tipping Spidey off to Ock's involvement. He added condensed tanks to the back, connected to the balloon, so that at a push of a button, the gas could be filtered out into the tank and the balloon could tuck away into a sleeve on his back, making it easier to switch to running and escape into a crowd. He also increased the power of the propulsion tech in the boots to increase speed and maneuverability. He even gave Bobby some experimental gauntlets he'd built to try and get past Spider-Man's irksome Spidey sense that always alerted him to danger. They had built into them small confined samples of symbiote, taken from the sometimes villain, sometimes hero, Venom, who had bonded with Spider-Man once, giving him the ability to not trigger the Spider's senses. This would have been very helpful if Bobby didn't have a bad habit of getting giddy and laughing when he was getting close enough to take a strike on the Spider. With all this though, Bobby went out into the world proudly owning the title of Balloon Boy and became the most annoying and distracting villain he could possibly be for the Spider. Even though Spidey should have been hot on the tail of the Sinister Six after the breakout, he spent over a week trying to wrangle the Balloon Boy, who was even more evasive with his upgraded tech. In that time, Balloon Boy would prove himself, if nothing else, to be incredibly useful to Doc Ock, just as he had wanted. Though he did also end up proving that he could be near lethal to the Spider, after Spidey broke his gauntlets and the symbiote inside leaked out onto Bobby, giving him some teeth and claws, and a much worse attitude. That situation turned out to be a real nightmare for Spider-Man.
The art from this episode will be made available as posters on my Teespring store, links in the description. There's also tons of other posters up there, and sweaters and shirts, but I don't need to make this poster ad break longer than that, so let's get back into more.
The hero Firestorm is an odd one in the wide roster of the Justice League. He is only able to take form with his full abilities by fusing two people together, an adept young athlete by the name of Ronnie Raymond and a scientist named Dr. Martin Stein. Their consciousness and bodies were connected in an accidental nuclear explosion, one that Lex Luthor was interested in recreating. In an isolated lab in Utah, Luthor had built an underground nuclear testing site where he was having his scientists conduct experiments to try and recreate the specific nuclear energy that had granted Ronnie Raymond and Dr. Stein their incredible abilities. But he also needed willing test subjects, and with the high risks involved, none of his employees were willing to bite the bullet. Instead, he used means that would make Amanda Waller proud. He found a team of low-rent supervillains about to be tried with a lengthy prison sentence and had one of his own lawyers meet with them in private. The lawyer told this group of 4 criminals that she could make their prison sentence disappear if they would come and spend 6 months in a lab as subjects, with the added benefit that the final results could make their abilities far greater. Then they'd be released to do as they please. Their leader, Lizzie Afton, who used the villain moniker Circus Freak, spoke for them all and agreed. Though, as a very impatient young woman, 6 months would prove to be too long for her to wait. The group had only been in their separate cells of Luthor's lab being prepped for experimentation for about 2 months when Lizzie started getting antsy. The next time she was allowed out of her cell, she told her gang that she had an escape plan in mind. When the workday was done, often the only person around the site was the night security guard, Mike Benedict. She'd been talking through her cell to Mike plenty, buttering him up and telling him how big and strong he looked and how much she wished she could get her hands on him. And the rest of the gang knew where this was going. On a night they'd planned for, Lizzie convinced Mike to open her cell and come inside to keep her company. Then, she overpowered him and forced him to open the other cells. The whole team escaped and they went looking for anything they could steal on their way out, bringing Mike along with them to keep him quiet. Unfortunately, he slipped out of their grip just long enough while they were in the main server room to pull the alarm. They grabbed him again, but he said he couldn't deactivate it now that the alarm was going. So they started smashing things to try and get it to shut off. And soon enough, they smashed the wrong set of things. They wound up setting off a series of explosions that blew up the experimental nuclear reactor in the site, blasting all 4 of the crooks and Mike with unknown radiation. Very similar to the stuff that hit Ronnie Raymond and Martin Stein. And perhaps all that was exactly what Luthor had wanted to happen. When Mike came to, he was shocked to find that his body was flying high above the Utah mountain ranges. Though he quickly started to fall. He had no idea what was going on, he thought he should be dead, but then he started hearing other voices in his head as he fell, saying things like, "Wait, why does he have control now? Come on, let me take control. Get it together, security simp." The voices were the 4 criminals that had just used him. In a way, as they'd been promised, they'd all been given incredible powers of flight, healing, fire projection, extreme durability, and a myriad of possibilities with subatomic manipulation that none of these beings were smart enough to understand how to use. But like Raymond and Stein, the only way to use these abilities was while all fused together, in a group that now included Mike the security guard. While they fell, they were finally able to tell Mike how to turn back on the flight abilities and get them airborne once again, which both stopped them from hitting the ground and got them moving farther away from the inbound LexCorp jets that were tracking them all down. Under Mike's control, they managed to fly so fast that they got across to the East Coast in minutes, easily escaping the jets. They landed, and when they did, they were able to figure out a way to all separate into their 5 unique selves. But while they were separate, none of them had any of the enhanced abilities, and Circus Freak and her pals weren't eager to let those go. They found that by all grabbing Mike at once and focusing, they could fuse together once more and regain their powers, but that Mike had most control over the body they were all in while they were blended. Mike would have been completely content to abandon the powers and get away from these people, but LexCorp was after them all, and Circus Freak convinced Mike that he'd end up as a lab rat if he let himself get caught. His safest bet was to stay with the group. And so, for the time being, he was stuck with these criminals. But eventually, they would genuinely grow on him, and their shared persona would be one that they'd all embrace and utilize for some less than legal doings. Many teams of superheroes have made names for themselves in the world for their acts of heroism and defeating dangerous threats. The Avengers have defeated Thanos, the X-Men have bested Apocalypse, the Fantastic Four have thwarted Doctor Doom, and the Mediocre Melodies have defeated, well, to be determined, I suppose. This up-and-coming group of superheroes are no stranger to battles with villains, but none have been of such notable caliber as to get them the global attention they felt they deserved. Some perceived them as a bit silly for often singing and playing music while they thwarted foes, but they hoped this would someday catch on as their fun-loving signature. For the time being, though, they were often disregarded as C-tier compared to the Avengers, even though the Mediocre Melodies had actually been around longer. Madison Sapo, or Polyfrog as she called herself, and her 4 friends had all been given abilities and tech by a man named Dr. Emily, before he'd been hired away by Stark Industries, now building tech that helped the Avengers. Madison and her friends all continued to use their abilities to try and help people and fight criminals, but always had a feeling of abandonment by the Doctor and resentment towards Stark and the Avengers for all the glory they now got. It wasn't enough to make the Mediocre Melodies go dark, in fact, the very opposite. While they did feel negatively towards the Avengers, they used it as fuel to try and push themselves to be better and better heroes. Sure, they were doing it partially to seek glory and to one-up the heroes that they perceived as their rivals, but they were still doing a lot of good. Madison had been a gymnast with self-professed ninja skills even before getting any enhancements. Now, with a combination of physical and tech assistance, she could leap 30 feet in a single bound, cling to walls, and shoot a sticky tendril from one of her arms that resembled a frog's tongue to swing from. Of course, this meant on occasions when she did get attention for her heroics, she'd often be regarded as an off-brand Spider-Man. Along with that, she spoke in a very high-pitched and overly giddy voice that often caused people to underestimate her. Her team didn't exactly have any members as flashy as the Avengers, but they did have their skills. A British illusionist who could rival Mysterio, a burly bear-themed brawler with super strength, an adept samurai who carried a banjo wherever he went, and their eldest member was a hippo-themed hero who... okay, well, his power may as well have been talking their villains into submission. Still though, they fought as a cohesive team and were unified in their goal to both help make the world a better place and someday one-up those show-stealing so-called Earth's mightiest heroes. Madison swore she would never leave behind her mantle as Polyfrog and would never rest until people realized why they should love and respect her and the Mediocre Melodies.
I hadn't drawn a character's head at the angle that I drew Balloon Boy's there in a long time, and I'm gonna be honest, that kind of kicked my butt a little bit. Took a long time. Anyway, if you're new here and you want more like this, you'll probably like my Five Nights at Freddy's Animatronics as Marvel Supervillains episode, but you might also like my recent episodes of taking forgotten Marvel characters and rebooting them into the MCU. But besides that, that's all for today, except of course for ending this video on some kind of positive or inspiring note, and the thought I want to leave people with is the idea that to become a professional artist or professional anything, you do not have to be perfect at that thing. I've been earning money off my art for over a decade now, and there are still times, like with Balloon Boy there, where I draw something and I just feel like I have no idea what I'm doing. So go easy on yourself and know that whatever stage you get to, you're always going to be learning and improving. And there are lower entry art jobs out there that you can get and use to help you improve in the process of doing it that can then help you get to whatever bigger, more flashy job you want in the future. I hope that's inspiring, I love you all, and I'll see you all in the next episode on Friday. Goodbye.